Welcome everybody. Welcome to a casual reproduction of a talk that I gave earlier this month at the Peninsula at the Indian River Bay. I gave a talk about how to manage conflict in loving relationships. This was a part of our enrichment series where we have people from the community talk about things they may have experienced or developed careers around, and they have a contribution to make that other people might be interested in. So I gave this talk, and we're recreating it now in a very casual way to try to have a better record and make it available to some members of the community who would like to access this material, but also to my children who are scattered around the world, would like to see what this is all about. So that's what we're doing. So I'll be talking. I have slides here that are probably not terribly easy to read, but I will read them to you and try to make them available to you. We'll go forward that way. So as a preface, my name is Peter Thomas. I am a clinical psychologist. I received my PhD at the University of Connecticut back in 1973. Did my dissertation on how couples argue constructively, how they can argue constructively. And I worked for 43 years in the field, and I've had a lot of experience, and I feel like I have been taught a lot by the patients I worked with and learned a lot over the years I'd like to share about managing conflict. Now, most people in our community have been married 30, 40, 50 years. A lot of people have their own methods and styles for managing conflict, and that's something to respect. You know, to the degree they feel it's working well, it's something to work with, but perhaps supplement with some additional ideas that we will have. I want to say a word about the word fight. I'm going to refer to fighting, even though fighting is only a description of maybe the first 25% of what goes on in a conflictual exchange. The rest of it is really not fighting, but we'll use this as a shorthand, and I'll describe the rest of the interactions as we go along. So that's the basic program. I'm going to work with these slides, and I'm going to start with a quiz. So, well, my screen's already going out. First step on the quiz is true or false. Conflict is a good thing. Now, probably you can discern the bias that would be inherent in this presentation. From my point of view, conflict is a good thing. It means that there is some effort to address pain or dysfunction, something that's not successful for people, and somebody is bringing it up and initiating an interaction around the conflict with the goal of making it better and helping the relationship to improve. So in that sense, conflict is a good thing. Next one. The most common problem is that people fight too much. That is not true. There's a lot of research that suggests that over 90% of the people studied tend to avoid fights excessively. And I think you can easily see the issues that come along in that context. If you avoid things, you carry them around, you may accumulate more resentments and hostilities. People will sometimes accumulate a lot of material. Then when it finally blows up, it comes out in a very uncontrolled manner, and it can be overwhelming and works very poorly. And ironically, the lesson people get out of that is, oh, I shouldn't have brought it up, it's such a mess. When in fact, the real guidance would be, you should bring it up much earlier when you can deal with it in a more manageable fashion. So, people fight too little. Next slide says it is possible for one person to win a fight. This is sort of a win the battle, lose the war kind of thing, where there may be an argument about somebody being late or some concrete issue, and perhaps there is a way for one person to prove their point. But in the larger context of fighting, which includes cooperative negotiation and trying to help people manage their relationships in a more general way, there really isn't a winner unless both people win. If there is success, it's a mutual positive result for both people, and it's not just one person winning the fight. Okay, next. Yelling is bad. Now, the answer to that for me is that it really depends on the individual couple. Bottom line is that people have their own standards or their own norms and limits for what they can tolerate with volume and with language and with a variety of fighting behaviors. Some people really cannot tolerate volume much at all, and for them yelling would be a bad thing. Some families, and I think Eastern European families, sort of have this stereotypical characterization that they are loud and that being loud is okay, and that yelling in that context might be fine. And in fact, it could even be positive in a sense that it communicates the person's passion about the issue and what they really care about. So yelling really is an individual matter. However, both people in the relationship need to agree about those limits, and people need to stay within those limits and to be respectful of one another. Okay, next. If something is wrong, you should hash it out whenever and wherever you are. This is definitely false. And I think it's pretty obvious. Really, there are conditions that will result in a good outcome for conflict management. And here are some of the things that are important to have. Number one, you need privacy. You need to be alone, just you and your partner, so that you can disclose material that may be very personal or very painful. You can do that between the two of you without feeling embarrassed in any larger social context. So privacy is a big deal. That's one condition. Number two, no alcohol is a condition. If there has been any alcohol use, the conflict management, the fighting, the arguing will go much more poorly. This is the same guideline that goes on in therapy, where most therapists will refuse to see a patient if a patient shows up for a session and they've been drinking or using any kind of substance that will affect them. Just means that their judgment is bad, their organization is impaired, their memory probably won't be great, and it's just a bad thing to do to have arguments if you've been drinking. Number three, you need time. Obviously, time is an important element. Sometimes people will get into an argument on the way out the door in the morning where they have very limited time to do anything. People need to recognize that that's not going to be successful. You need to revisit the issue in the evening or at some point where you can give it an adequate amount of time. And then the last condition that I would list is energy or fatigue. If you're really exhausted, and obviously it's easy to see how this can happen. The people may put in a long day, they may go out and do something socially, they could have a few drinks, it could be 11:30 at night, they're exhausted, maybe something happened while you were out that disturbed one or the other person, and to get into it at that point when you're very tired, it's just not going to work well. Conflict management is difficult enough. You want to have all your resources about you when you go into this kind of an enterprise. Okay, so that's that. All right, this screen says most marriages have one person who approaches conflict and one person who withdraws from conflict. Now this is true, but it's particularly true in dysfunctional relationships. It's something that therapists see a lot. People come in for marital therapy. One person is approaching and maybe approaching poorly, maybe in an angry, blaming, very frustrated way, and the other person is withdrawing, and their justification is, well, look at how angry and dysfunctional this approach is, so I'll withdraw. That withdrawal stimulates the approacher to keep chasing them more and more, and it's a very bad pattern. Really what you want in therapy is sort of a mutual, moderate approach that both people feel they have something to give. They're going to try to make it safe for people to do the exchange, try to get beyond blaming, which we'll talk about later, but have both people entering in and kind of approaching one another rather than one withdrawing. The withdrawal thing is a bad process. Okay, you should not go to sleep without resolving your differences. That is false. I think it would be clearly false just from the conditions that we talked about before. But it is false also because sometimes it takes a while for these things to be resolved, and sometimes you need a break. So one of the skills of conflict management is knowing how to utilize timeout. And timeout is, not like with the kids where you send them to the corner for a timeout. Timeout means you're taking a break and it's really for the purpose of recovery. So if you consider that there's sort of a balance between emotion and thinking that can go on, and we're at our best when those two factors are in balance. And it's not good when one overwhelms the other. So if people are very emotionally upset and it really overwhelms their thinking, that's not a good moment. And a timeout really is designed to help people recover, kind of get their balance back, remove them from the stimulation of the argument, help their thinking to return. I don't know if you've had this experience, but many people have had the experience where you're in the middle of a fight and you're so fired up, you don't know what you're going to say next, but you know it's going to be bad. You just know it's going to be destructive. So that's when you need a timeout, to sort of settle down, regroup, focus on what it is you're trying to communicate, and use timeout in a very positive way. So timeouts can be overnight, but the key to a timeout is it carries with it the promise that you will return. You will come back to whatever the primary issues are, and you will revisit that. You're not just withdrawing. So that's timeout. Okay, now we are going to talk about conflict management, slash fighting, slash negotiation, slash problem solving. They're all describing the part of the program where people get involved, they try to work together to arrive at a better conclusion. So that one strategy is going to be our focus today. But I want to mention that there are actually other strategies that are also important in the overall issue of handling conflict. And I don't know how legible this is for you, but in addition to negotiation, another strategy is acceptance. So this is what I mean by acceptance. It's my fantasy that if you go to people who've been married 50 or 60 years, they're happy, they've done well, and you say to them, are there any problems or issues that you were never able to resolve? That they will say yes, that almost everybody will have a few things that they worked on, they tried to do it better, they just couldn't make it happen between the two of them. And after many years of that, there may be a point where people, one or both, will say, okay, I'm going to stop fighting about this. I just have to accept that my partner does whatever, or such and such happens between us, and I don't like it, but I'm not able to get to a better place with it. So instead of just revisiting the fight over and over forever, I'm just going to accept that we have this difference. And I'm going to sort of let go of it, take a step back, and let that difference exist. And that is one way of managing a conflict. Now, acceptance is good when it is limited, when it is a moderate amount or a small amount. The cost of acceptance is distance. So the more I accept that my partner and I have this one issue or two issues where we can't see eye to eye and we can't make it happen, the more I accept that and take a step back, it creates a little distance between us. So if I'm accepting 8 or 10 important differences and managing them that way, I've really created, or we've created, a lot of distance between us, and that can be a major issue. So acceptance is a strategy, strategically, at certain times, not a blanket kind of approach, but something that is part of the program. All right, the next strategy I listed is let time pass. This is, it's certainly something that people don't think about when they're young and getting married or in the first 5 years of their marriage. But in fact, time passing will resolve some differences. Change is inevitable. We're changing, we're going through growth and development and shifts in our identity and shifts in stage of life and shifts in the kind of stresses that we encounter. And something that could be an argument at time 1 may not be an argument at time 2. So in the first year of your marriage, there could be a trust issue. Something could happen, say flirtatious behavior or something like that, and you're brand new and this is pretty threatening, and so it's a big issue. In year 10, when you have a foundation of trust and you've accomplished that time without that kind of injury, some flirtatious behavior may then be seen just as harmless, even if I don't like it, sort of a harmless behavior on the other guy's part, and it's not such a big issue. So time passing will alter some of the issues and help people resolve things at times. The last strategy I listed is affirmation. And affirmation, it's probably not really a strategy, but it's so important and it's so neglected that I wanted to include it in this particular slide. When we get involved in a conflict, when we get highly emotionally involved, that is a consuming moment. Feelings of distress can really take over your experience, and it's all you experience. You just experience this conflict with your partner, and everything else is sort of lost at that time. Affirmations simply say, hey, there's more to us than this problem. We have this problem, it's a painful problem, we're hurting with it right now, but there's more to us than that, or there's more to you than that. There are things about you that are good. So affirmations really refer to saying that here are qualities in you that are positive or that I like. Penn State used to have a communication skills program where every time a person spoke and finished with their unhappiness or complaint, they had to say one positive thing about their partner that was true. Didn't matter how small it was, but one thing. So that kind of affirmation just helps people keep their balance better and stay connected to the fact that there are many other good qualities between us and things that we can enjoy and rely on. Okay, so that's the 4 strategies. Now we're going back to number 1, to the negotiation, conflict management, fighting sort of thing, and we're going to talk about that more specifically. All right, so I'm writing here that there are 3 stages of a negotiation / fight / argument. And that the first stage is an engagement stage. And this is, when I kept saying the fighting, the word fight describes maybe 25% of what goes on, this is the fight part. People engage, usually angry, they may be making nasty remarks to one another. It's sort of messy, it's not very well organized. People can say hurtful things, and it's definitely conversational. People typically will be, you know, I can't believe you were flirting with that girl. No, I wasn't flirting with her. You know, why are you such a prude? No, I'm not a prude. You know, you're just mistreating me. And they go back and forth in this conversational way. And that back and forth is very stimulating of anger and tends to make the anger just grow and grow and grow, and it can become really dangerous and destructive. So that engagement part, that fighting part, is something that we want to alter. And the way we alter that is that, oh, I forgot to mention, at that beginning stage, there's a focus on the other person. Everything I say is, you do this, or you don't do that, or I don't like that you do this. It's really about you. But we go on, and we have interventions. And the first, and this is what will happen in therapy, that the therapist will intervene in these processes. So first they try to limit how long that back and forth thing goes on. You don't want to let it run wild, and you don't at home want to let it run wild. Secondly, you really insist that they focus on one issue. There's one primary concern, and others may come up while you're doing this discussion because people tend to avoid so much, they have a backlog. But still, we want to have this focus on one primary issue. And then the other thing we use is monologues. I want to talk about that at some length. But we're going to take a break for the moment, and we're going to come back with a second segment of our discussion. Be right back. Welcome back. All right, we were going to talk about monologues, and that was a good time to break and come back and focus on that. Because, as I said in my talk earlier this month, if you go away from this presentation, and you're only going to remember one thing, the one thing I want you to remember is the value of having monologues instead of a conversational back and forth exchange. So what I mean by monologues is simply that one person talks and one person listens. There's no interruption, There's no stimulation from the listener saying things that will make you madder. The one person just listens. Now, listening like that is very difficult because you have things to say and you want to correct your partner who may be saying things that you think are outrageously inaccurate and factually wrong or whatever. You really need to suppress that and just try to listen. And listening, or not communicating, includes no nonverbal behavior as well, so that you don't do the big eye roll, you don't give the sigh and the head shake, which are obviously communications which will stimulate the speaker. The listener just tries to listen to what the person is saying. And in therapy, I would typically give the first person starting 5 minutes to speak. Now, 5 minutes, when you're not interrupted, is a long time, actually. I have a lot of people who would run out of things to say in 5 minutes, even though they felt they could go on for hours. But when they're heard, they're not stimulated, they say what they have to say on their mind, that's the monologue we're seeking, and the other person listens. Now, if you're a real psychological champion, here it also lists summaries. And as I said at the beginning, we don't expect everybody to go through all this structure and do every step exactly the way we talk about. But it is good to know that summaries are powerful. So the summary of person A is speaking, person B is listening. What I'm hoping is at the end of the 5 minutes, person B can say, all right, what I got out of that, here are the 2 or 3 main things that I heard you say. Now, as you can imagine, that can be a very affirming moment because a lot of people feel the other guy never listens. And if you're doing that conversational thing, then the other person isn't listening. While you're talking, they're readying their retort or their defense or their counterattack. No listening is going on. So if somebody does a summary and can show that they understand what you're trying to say in these 2 or 3 main points, that's a very positive and powerful moment. It's a lot to ask people to do, but just so you know, these are the kind of things that can be done. All right, so that's stage 1. Now, when people do monologues, they tend to go from saying you're no good for this reason, that reason, the other, and to saying, you always do this, you never do that, into saying, okay, you do all these things that really hurts my feelings, or into saying, I feel like you're not listening to me, I feel like I don't exist. So we really hope for people to drift from statements about you that are blaming statements to statements with I that are more feeling statements where people are starting to say the kind of the deeper meaning of the fight for them. So we're hoping for that drift. Stage 1, one issue, monologues, limit how bad it is, and try to drift over toward talking about feelings, which is stage 2. Stage 2 is feelings. Now, around that original issue, it's concrete, there are right and wrong parts of it. Feelings are not right or wrong. Feelings are personal experiences. They are valid and authentic for the individual. Somebody else may not understand how you can feel that way, but it is your experience and it's what you feel. So at this second stage of the exchange, you're really hoping for people to try to share some of that. You're not in a fight anymore. You're really trying to tell the other guy who you are, what it's like to be you, what feelings are involved for you, why it's so painful for you. So you're trying to exchange that kind of a message. So again, we like to have monologues, and if summaries are there, that's great. We're not really looking for agreement. We're not expecting people to feel the same thing. In fact, we expect that they'll feel different things, so we accept that kind of a gap. And as it goes on, as a therapist, I'm saying to the people, okay, what is it that you really want your partner to understand about you? What is it that it's important for your partner to understand about you? So that's the feeling step, the second stage of this thing. Now, I've known couples that were very psychologically minded and bright and sophisticated, and they would get through these first 2 stages. They would have the argument, they would get it under control, they would sort of do these monologues, They would talk about feelings, and it would be like an emotional reunion. It would be a big disclosure, sort of a cleansing experience. And at the end of that, they would stop, which was a big mistake. They would stop and they would believe, okay, we worked it out because he or she understands me now. So this won't happen again. However, they haven't talked about the concrete behavior that led to those feelings, and that too often that concrete behavior may happen again because the person won't be clear about exactly what it is that I need to change for you. And then when they have a recurrence of the problem, in some ways it's even worse because I went through pouring my heart out for you, to you, and you still did it, you just must not care about me at all. So stopping after stage 2 would be a major mistake. Therefore, stage 3 is plans, proposals, solutions. Now, when you're working with married couples, what you do at this point, you go back to the beginning issue. You started somewhere, if it was flirtatious behavior, if it was some other kind of thing, there was something specific that happened. And what I want as a therapist is I want my couple, I want the complainer to say, okay, this is what needs to be different. This is what would make me feel okay if you do this or you don't do that. So it needs to be very specific, very concrete. And the person makes that proposal, and the responder gets to, what it says here is, they get to accept that proposal, accept it with conditions, reject it, or take time to think about it. Now I'm going to give you an example where we'll kind of work through these things and hopefully flesh it out for you a little bit. But often the responder will accept without thinking it through well, and we want the responder to be more careful when they make a plan. All right, so let me give you, the example that I've always used over the years about a couple that I worked with in California, 43 years ago or whatever it was, 1972. It's a lot of years ago. And I was working in the VA hospital, and the vet was the husband, and their physical characteristics are relevant to this issue. The guy was kind of a short, slightly built, kind of balding guy. He was unemployed. He had been hospitalized for depression. He did not feel good about himself, his self-esteem, his general life. He was really feeling pretty poor about his life in general. His wife was really the functional person at home. She was the one who worked. She was the one who took care of the kids. She was the one who made most of the decisions. Physically, she was bigger than her husband. She was taller. She was heavier. She was heavy. That's part of the issue. So she was in a very different place from him. Okay, so this couple comes into a session with me, and they open with the classic line, doctor, we had a fight on the way over to the hospital today. We've had the same fight 2 or 3 times a week for 18 years. All right, so what was the fight? The wife says she's upset about the way her husband drives. That he drives in a way that makes her feel awful. She complains to him about it. He'll never change anything. He's saying that she is nagging and nitpicking, and so they have this big argument. They never agree. All right, so when we slow down, the issue was about driving, although it wasn't very well spelled out specifically. And we didn't want them to go on with those attacks very long. We wanted them to move into talking about how they felt, what this event meant to them. And in this example, there was a lot of meaning that was not immediately apparent. For the husband, the meaning of this was that although he felt pretty lousy about himself and his life, the one thing he had was cars. He was an amateur mechanic. He would detail cars. He loved cars. And he liked to drive. So basically, this guy is feeling like this is my one area of expertise, my one area of worth and value. And the way he experiences it, she is trying to take even that away when he's lost everything else. So that it's not a minor argument, it's a major emotional, psychological event for him. Turns out that the same was true for his wife, that it was a major event for her. And this I really didn't see coming until they spelled it out. But she talked about driving, and that when the guy would drive in certain ways, she would be sort of thrown around in the seat. And she felt very awkward about her body. She felt very uncomfortable about being overweight. She felt that, actually she felt he was doing it purposely to make her feel worse, and that she felt kind of humiliated and embarrassed, and that's why it was such a powerful event for her. So when they got into the feeling stage, those are some of the feelings that came out, and at least it made it clear to them that this wasn't a squabble only about fighting, that this had a lot of meaning to them that they may not have appreciated for themselves or for the other guy. All right, so that was stage 2, about the feelings. But stage 3 was interesting to me because, I'm working with the wife. She was the one who initiated. I'm saying, okay, you don't like the way he drives. Let's talk about that. Is it that he drives too fast? And she said, well, no, this is California. Everybody drives too fast. She said, that's not really it. I said, is it on the highway that it bothers you? No, I'm okay if we're going fast down the highway. Stop and go traffic in town. She said, well, that's a bit of a problem. It can get jerky and so on, but it's not the main thing. She said, the main thing is exit ramps. When we go off an exit ramp, the big curved process, and I slide around and I feel awful. He goes way too fast on these exit ramps. Okay, the point here is that you want to be highly specific. Even if it starts to sound like it's trivial, you want to be very specific so there's a very clear plan and there's a very clear chance that they can change behavior and they can know they've changed. So she said, okay, it's the exit ramps. I said, all right, well, you want him to go the speed limit on the exit ramps? Would that be okay? She said, it doesn't have to be that close. She said, I would say within 10 miles an hour of the exit ramp speed, I'm fine with that. So that was her proposal. I go to the guy, what do you think? He says, it's fine, no problem. I can do that. I'll go the speed limit. I said, okay, slow down. Let's consider this. I think if she's giving you 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, you ought to take it because it gives you a little more leeway. And I said to him, maybe you should accept with a condition. And the condition is that you're not perfect and you might forget, once in a while. So that if you just aren't thinking about it and you go off too fast, that won't be a huge violation when it happens the first time. That she'll just remind you and you'll try to get that back under control and you'll do it better again. So that you have that kind of backup and that kind of buffer between you and a real violation of a problem. So he was fine with that. So they made that agreement. Now, obviously, I wouldn't tell you the story if it wasn't a successful outcome, but they did very well with that. And for me, being a young psychologist, it was very rewarding to have them come back and say they couldn't believe that they were able to work this out and to do well with that fight that had plagued them for 18 years. All right, so that's the basic program with the 3 stages of a negotiation or a conflict or a fight. The engagement, identify the issue stage, the feeling stage, and the plan proposal stage. All right, now I want to revisit the primary tools that we've talked about here. And the tools, I don't know if you can read it, the tools are listed here. The number 1 tool is monologues. As I said before, if you do nothing else but you stop the conversational back and forth and have monologues with some effort to listen, you're going to have a huge improvement. Number 2 was summaries. We talked about that. The 3rd thing listed here is timeout. We talked about that. I just think it's a really useful tool to try to help people manage and not get totally out of control. Timeout comes with the promise to come back to the issue. Fourth thing, iMessages. You know, we want to drift away from blaming the other guy toward talking about how we feel, what it's like to be us, what our main message is. And then the last one I listed again was affirmations. That it's surprisingly powerful when people are able to say, okay, I've got all these complaints about you here, but, you know, I really value this part of you over there. And it just helps people be less defensive, less threatened, less overwhelmed. Okay, that's basically the talk that I gave back on June 5th at the Peninsula. We had a lot of great people. We had over 60 people. It was really delightful for me. We had a lot of questions that we're not going to try to recapture here. I did want to put this material out, so anybody who wants to review this and have access to this can do that. My wife Karen has been recording and helping with everything. Karen, are there any things you think I should go back to or we left out?
It was great.
Okay. All right, so we're good. Thanks very much for watching. Have a good day.